Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Daniel. I am the president and CEO of the Cyber Threat Alliance, and we're a nonprofit intelligence sharing organization. I'm pleased to be talking today with Derek Mankey, from Fortinet, one of our founding members. Derek, if you would like to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Michael. Great to be here on this webinar today. Derek Mankey. I've been with CTA since day one. Vice President of Global Threat Intelligence at Fortinet. Been with Fortinet for almost also since day one, for about 19 years now, and currently sit on the CTA board along with Michael, and big supporter of the CTA, and really happy to talk about where we've come and where we're going.
Great. Well, one of the standing jokes that we now have at CTA is that we've discovered the reason why we talked about information sharing for so long. It's because it's a lot easier than actually doing it. So can you talk a little bit about sort of Fortinet's experience with information sharing and why you decided to help start the Alliance?
Sure. So yeah, if we go back to when we started the Alliance, it was really we wanted to simplify information sharing because there's obviously so many different ways to do it. Everybody really has, in all my experience with information sharing too, Michael, everybody has a different use case. There's a lot of overlap, of course, but for us at Fortinet, the initial use case was trying to reduce redundancy of efforts, because even back then there was a lot of sample sharing, so virus samples that were being shared, a lot of duplicates that were being shared through different data sources. So the use case back then was, how can we extract value for something outside of a threat feed, right? And so the initial platform that we set up was really to exchange virus samples, but add a filter to it, right? To do a pre-check to see, okay, is this something that hasn't been seen in the last 48 hours by checking our other sources? If you give me an apple, do I already have an apple, or do I want an orange, right? So that was the initial use case for it. And of course, that was very oversimplified, but it was a starting point. And I think in the spirit of the Cyber Threat Alliance, ever since that first version of the platform that we set up, there's been an evolution, but each stage has been more value added to it. Again, we're always looking at that use case and adapting to the members. And from Fortinet's side, again, we started with the samples, but today, if we look at what we're doing with it today, we're ingesting as much as we can to make it actionable. I mean, there's so many different IOC types and TTPs and all of this that lives in Magellan, the information sharing platform for the CTA. So, we're a security vendor, of course, and we can translate those IOCs into various products, into various subscriptions, or security controls as well too, for protection.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, on average, we're running about 300,000 indicators a day through the platform, and we have about 34 or 35 different types of indicators now.
Yeah.
Everything from those, malicious files, the hashes and the binaries, but also, network observables from IP addresses and domain names, to network traffic observables, the ports and the, ASN numbers and things like that, to host properties and all sorts of different things. And I think it all comes with context, right? That's the other piece, is that these are not just naked IOCs. They all come with at least a date timestamp and an indication of where you think it falls in a kill chain, right? So that makes it much more contextualized information as well.
Yeah, and Michael, what you just said, over 30 types of IOCs, and just the context that's added to it. Again, when we started, it was just samples, right? And as I said, we reduced the redundancy, but I mean, that's a big number, right? That's something that it's not a cookie cutter solution for each member of the CTA, but with that much diversity, that we've built, there really is a use case for every member as well too.
Yeah, and I thought, it'd be interesting to kind of talk through some of the use cases. I mean, you mentioned one from a security vendor standpoint, the way that Fortinet operates, but I mean, there are other use cases too, right? For why a company might want to join CTA.
Yeah, absolutely. So there is, at the end of the day, there is generally two models we work with. Of course, we work with Magellan, which is a platform itself, and that's being able to add value to those millions of IOCs that are shared, right? So the context vetting information is another use case as well too. As seeing if there's essentially a confidence rating if other members of the CTA are also seeing something, or if they're not, that's a good fact check, right? Saying that
Right.
maybe this is something that truly is a 0 day, or just something that is fresh or new on the radar, or potentially again a false positive. But it's that escalation path, right, where they can dig in further. It's not all about volume either, right? A lot of the times when we think about information sharing, we think of the threat feed model, which CTA absolutely is not. I know we've talked about this because of the context, because of the way that you can essentially query it, not just Magellan, the platform itself, but the humans as well. I don't know if everybody realizes that, and even for us included as Fortinet, this is one of the biggest values, is the access to the pool of researchers behind the CTA from all the member organizations. That's a big pool. That's, if you look at the members of the CTA, it's a vast majority of organizations in cybersecurity and researchers. So having access to the human element is also a big use case too.
Yeah, and I think it's also, when you look at like again, that diversity issue, we have 35-ish members. There's always some that are in that are in onboarding, so we're not public about them yet, but about half are based in the US, but about half are actually based outside of the US, right? And some are big, some are small, some are focused on endpoint security, some focus on network, some focus on industrial control systems, some focus on ratings of different companies. So there's a lot of variety in the membership, and that's one of the things that we're working to continually increase and expand, right? Because I think that diversity of view actually also helps with the quality of the data. And the reason why somebody might want to make use of the data is because it comes from such a different, diverse background.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just the geos, as you mentioned, so it's truly global coverage. That's definitely one element to it, Michael. You even mentioned the ASNs, right? I mean, that's again something extremely powerful to be able to contextualize and look to literally track movement of threats. It's another use case. I'm sure we can list all of these use cases, right? But the verticals too, and traditionally those verticals. So you mentioned industrial controls as an example, or telecommunications as well. Two completely different sets, environments as well, that are, for some members, traditionally difficult to get views or access to. So that's, again, quite powerful to be able to essentially, through sharing, get views from those environments that otherwise wouldn't be accessible.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that also always has struck me about the use cases that we're talking about, CTA, we're a nonprofit, right? So we're all about, helping the ecosystem, and we're all about, the mission. And most cybersecurity companies are too, all about the mission, but they're also for-profit entities, right? They're in the market to make money in providing cybersecurity. And so what I also try to make the argument is that the reason you should be sharing information, sharing threat intelligence is not just because it will actually help, the whole ecosystem for the greater good. That is true, but it also makes you more competitive as a company and not less. And I think this is actually a really important thread to sort of pull on, because I think there's this popular perception that, well, why would I share? Because I'm giving away my competitive advantage.
Right.
And you, I mean, you and I have talked about this before, but I think it's worth sort of talking about in this forum of why that's not really the case.
Yeah, absolutely. Because so I think it takes us back to the mission statement. If we look at the mission statement of the CTA, it's to elevate security for the overall good, right? It's that how can we elevate the security stack to make it, I know this is an old saying now, right? But it's make it more expensive for cyber criminals to operate, to essentially add more resistance, cause more friction. That's the way that benefits us all, right? So that's the motivation to do it. But at the end of the day, what we're sharing within the CTA is trusted sharing between members, right? We don't share things that we can't, of course. There are cases where we have things under NDA where, we have certain TLP read things. And of course, that's the way it's designed, right? You can't share those.
Right.
But for the most part, all the other intelligence is mutually beneficial, because when you share, you also learn too. There's more context built to it. We get on, again, going back to the human use cases, we've have so many of these examples in the past. I think the first was VPN filter. Of course, we had WannaCry, all the big breaking events, Log4j, of course, recently, well, seems recently, but it's still definitely an issue out there. When these things happen, again, sharing and learning on those human calls is really important, right? We've called it the clearing the fog exercises. So there's a benefit there, Michael. And I would say that the most evident aspect of this is through experience. This has worked, right? Since we started this sharing model, and we've done and started building that trust, we have competitors within the security vendor space, or within even the industry, getting on calls and sharing information because trust has been established, and it works, right? And I think that's a really big point. I'm like, prior to that model being established in the CTA, that was a big issue in the industry. So I really look at that as a game-changing moment as well, too.
Yeah, and I think that's a part of what we try to do, right? Is we try to create that safe space for competitors to work together in the CTA, context, because that's a neutral ground, right? That's got a protection around it, and I think that's really important. I also think it's it's key that, like, at the end of the day, I don't think most cybersecurity companies really are not selling their data, right? That's not really what they're providing their customers, particularly not anymore, right? What you're really selling to your customers is the value add that you put on top of the data. And so if that's the case, then more data for you, right, is better, because that actually helps you. And your comparative advantage really isn't driven by the size of your data pool compared to somebody else's data pool, right? Like that's not where the comparative advantage in the industry is coming from.
Yeah. I mean, that's the threat feed model again, which the CTA is not, as we said, right? So yeah, absolutely. And I also think that it's the early share program is that's the human sharing element that we've talked about, but being able to coordinate pre-release is also something that has so much benefit to it. One, again, before that, the early share model was in place, there was always this scramble out of the gates happening, right? Because one organization would go out, say with a blog on IOCs or what they've learned, and without that being coordinated with proper stakeholders, again, you're always behind, right? You're trying to catch up. Oh, do we have protection for this? Can we add this? How do we communicate this? Doing all of that in advance makes sure that everybody is ready. So in terms of, you can look at it in so many angles, right? In terms of, resources for organizations, right? That's a much more efficient process. You're not, wasting resources
Right.
from an OpEx perspective, right? From your analyst trying to catch up. Everything is, again, embargoed, but ready to go off the gate. So that's one aspect. So there's actually a business benefit to it. The other thing is that obviously there's a security benefit, right? That elevates security. Now you have this much more hardened security stack being pushed out the gate through that collective force, the strength in numbers, instead of just one organization that's protecting against it.
Yeah, and I think the other piece that is interesting in this area too is that, recently the US government released the National Cybersecurity Strategy. And one of the pieces in that strategy, one of the sort of overarching themes through it is kind of rebalancing the security burden, right? The idea that not all of the security burden should be all the way out at the end user. And I actually see, CTA is playing a role in that, right? Like, one of the lessons that I think that certainly I've taken from sort of working in the information sharing space is that, this is hard work, right? It takes a lot of work to do this, right? It takes investment, it takes capability. You were just talking about the efficiencies, that you have to seek. And, if you're not a dedicated cybersecurity company, right, that's pretty daunting to try to engage in. And so I think the idea that like where we need the sharing to happen, right, is at the security company level, not, yes, the banks need to share information about stuff that's relevant to them, but they shouldn't be trying to push a whole bunch of technical indicators around. Like that's our job, right?
Yeah.
And I think the CTA model fits very squarely in that area of realigning the security burden.
Yes. Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I agree with that too. It definitely facilitates that, again, to have to take that burden off, because otherwise it's being pushed down all the way to the end user. There's also, Michael, going back to sort of benefits and use cases, because again, there is a big list. People might think of, or when they think of information sharing of platforms, of course, yes, we do that at CTA with Magellan and the context and all of that we talked about. And yes, there's a human sharing and early share. So there really is a growing list there. But there's other things that we often don't talk about. We know this, I think, at the CTA. Well, no, I think we do know this at the CTA, but not everybody might know this. But there are there's a innovation piece as well too. There's essentially a voice, right? A voice between the collective members through committees that we have also within the CTA. That's a big aspect, right? Between essentially working groups and committees for projects, whether it's the roadmap for the next platform of information sharing, or a particular issue in the industry that we all want to perhaps read a paper on, or discuss together how we can better the industry too.
Yeah, no, and a good example of that, the last year in the US, the US Congress passed something called the Cyber Incident Reporting for Critical Infrastructure Acts, or CIA.
Yep.
And CTA worked with several other nonprofit organizations and some other companies as well to actually develop a framework that we submitted as a comment to the Department of Homeland Security and said, okay, if you want to implement the reporting requirements based on the experience of our members collectively, here's what we think a good reporting framework would look like, right?
Right.
And then we actually took it and made that framework global. We actually produced a global version of it that just came out like last week. And that's a good example of where we CTA collectively brought the expertise and viewpoint of the cybersecurity industry to that discussion.
Yeah.
Right. We're not the only players in that, but we brought that to the to DHS and to others. Some companies, right, they have, they can afford to have, and they're large enough, they have public policy people that they can engage, right? But a lot of cybersecurity companies can't can't do that very effectively. And so CTA is a way to amplify that voice and have a way to have a voice in the public policy process, for example, that you might not otherwise get if you were just trying to do it on your own as a cybersecurity company.
Yeah, absolutely, Michael. That's definitely a use case, especially for some of the smaller organizations too that join the
Yeah.
CT. Yeah.
But you also mentioned like papers and things like that. That's another use case too. I mean, we want to, I think our most recent one, we looked at cybersecurity threats to the Tokyo Olympics, but we're starting to put together the kind of the next set of things we might want to look at, because we don't want to just work on problems that the industry is already, pretty thoroughly exploring. That doesn't help anybody. But are there places where, we can bring the CTA perspective of, 30 plus vendors to 30 plus security companies to a problem set and, bring a different perspective to it. And I think that's another aspect of what we do.
Yeah. And I know, Michael, another one that we've talked about also is the in the spirit of not being a threat feed. Again, I think there's this idea when people think of information sharing and platforms of APIs and literally a platform, right? You hook up, that's it. I have access to the platform, I'm sharing information, set and forget. And that's, again, not the CTA. You can't set and forget, because again, there's engagement happening right through the committee, through the early shares, through and there is a lot of communication daily going back and forth, right? But the CTA is also not just a platform. There's humans, there's resources at CTA, yes, through its members, but also through the CTA itself too. And I think that's another important aspect, because there's support, right? When new members are trying to onboard, and again, there's no universal solution to this, so there's always ways to work with members, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, definitely having also spent many years in government and sort of coming out into CTA, I think I sort of knew this like intellectually, but it has really been driven home to me just how varied every company is, right? And people often will ask me, like, what's sort of a common onboarding path? And I don't even know how to answer that question anymore, right? I mean, it's like, well, I've got it in sort of general terms, but it's so general that I'm not sure that it actually helps you, right? Because every company is a little bit different. And what I've learned is that we really have to take a company by company approach to bringing them on board and integrating them into CTA, because everybody's a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a strength, but it is something that we have to that we actually have to work with. So I think, are there other sort of aspects of sort of the work that Fortinet has done with CTA, your experience in the field overall, that you'd want to kind of bring out into the discussion?
Yeah, I would say that we've continued to evolve our use cases as well. So certainly, so first of all, from a resource perspective, we've staffed, because there is value to this, and there's actually business benefit, as I said, right, from having engagement within the communities, right? So algorithm and intelligence is one of them, right, which is essentially that pool of researchers with regular calls talking about a given, it could be a given threat or a given problem that's happening out there. So again, that's something from our side that we've committed to, at Fortinet, and we found a lot of value in as well too. The Magellan platform itself too, of course, we are sharing through it. We're actually, there's a healthy competition that's been built up within the CTA, right, to encourage more sharing. So we look at that all the time, actually, and we're we're tuning all of the time. Again, it's not a set and forget. So that's a big thing
Right.
for us, right? We look at how are we actually scoring? Can we actually improve the score? Because that's going to benefit everyone. It's not just about being on a leaderboard, right? It's really about trying to, continually tune and improve the sharing of threat intelligence, because that goes actually beyond the CTA as well too. There's a learning from that, right? How we can, because as we use the CTA for as we tune that model and use the CTA day to day with that, we're also learning, right? We say, oh, there's a gap here that we we actually weren't showing this context, or maybe it's one of those 30 IOCs as an example, or whatever it is. So some examples of that recently with going from Stix v1 to Stix v2 on the Magellan platform, we have we started with cyber kill chain mappings, now TTP mappings, like TTPs. Not everybody speaks TTPs. For us, our products support TTPs, so that's actually a big use case for us as well too, where we absolutely wanted to share and ingest mappings of TTPs. For us, we build heat maps off of that, but that's something that we weren't doing 2-3 years ago, or at the start of the CTA, but we're doing now. So as I said, we don't, the samples, Michael, is another one too. That's an oldie but goodie. That's how the CTA started, as I said, but that's still a relevant use case, right? There's times where we don't have a sample, even for us. We have a lot of samples as a vendor, but sometimes we don't have it, and we'll have to reach out and ask, and there's usually a pretty good chance another member does, right?
Yeah, and I think that's the that's just the key to how CTA operates, is that it's an organization that's actually purpose built for the cybersecurity industry, right? And that's our focus. And we're always open to a wide variety of types of members, but our focus is really on those that are providing cybersecurity services to others in some way. And that you just highlighted the reason for that, right? We're operating at this level where we're talking about confidence in the IOCs. In fact, actually, that's one of the capabilities we're looking at adding. Well, not looking at. We have added to the platform and are looking at the process for getting that rolled out to our members, so that you could start providing us with your confidence score in a given IOC, which will make it even more nuanced for other members to do the analysis on, what's been shared with the platform, right? So there's, and I think we're also looking at, like, how could we share rules in addition to, IOC? So how could you use Magellan to share snort or YAR rules, for example, right? That would be much lower volume, a little bit different, but that might be of interest to our members too.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the beautiful thing about the way that Magellan's been built, and just the nature of also Stix v2 is very versatile. So again, it's not like we have to reinvent the wheel and create a brand new platform. It's how we kind of adapt that, and it has been, right? So there's always new categories of information being shared too.
Yeah, and I sometimes get asked about, like, talk about building a new platform. I sometimes get asked about, competition. Is there anybody else that does what CTA does? And I don't think there's anybody that is, exactly in our space. And, we're always for more sharing across the ecosystem. But I think one of the things that I've taken away is, again, to come back to where we started this conversation, this is hard work. And it takes a lot of investment. You've mentioned several times that it's not a set and forget, right? That this requires that ongoing investment, not only of dollars, but of time and people's attention. And I think probably just the way to kind of close out the discussion is, from, your long experience in the industry, kind of the things that really strike you as, kind of summing up the unusual, unique features about CTA.
Yeah, so I would say number one for sure is the game changer that I talked about, right? Being able to effectively not be chasing, right? To be ahead of the curve. That I would say that to me, that is the number one unique aspect of the CTA, because again, without that, without that coordination, without the members and all of that happening pre release, you're chasing, right?
Right.
And even if you look at other organizations out there that are sharing, they don't collectively, sorry, they don't collectively do that on the same level. So yeah, I would say that is something very powerful, especially with the, 35, around 35 members within the CTA. With that said too, the support through the platform development as well, that's something quite unique, that it's not a commercial platform, as you said, right? This is something that you can truly contribute to, and there's inputs. And that's also something quite unique, I would say, within the CTA. And then, the other thing I think would just be, quite honestly, the trust, the culture, the relationships, right? A lot of, again, a lot of other sharing organizations are on sort of a distribution list model, where it's not so personal, right? Sure, you can get some information in your inbox. You can reach out to someone virtually, perhaps, but again, we meet face to face also, right?
Yeah.
Virtually too, of course, but face to face, and there really is, relationships that are established, and culture, and that's quite unique, I'd say too.
Yeah. Well, Derek, thank you for taking the time to sit down with me today and talk about Fortinet, and how you see this space and how we have worked to improve it. Obviously there's always more work to be done. That's the typical reward for good work in cybersecurity, is you get more work. But but I really feel like we've made some important strides, and we have built an effective platform to enable the security community to work together, and that's really important going forward. I would like to say that we're going to put ourselves out of business sometime soon, but that doesn't appear to be the case. So we're in this for the long haul, and I very much appreciate both your personal and Fortinet's strong support for CTA.
Absolutely.
So with that, I think we will bring this discussion to a close, and we will be talking to you on our next webinar. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Michael.